Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison gripped the controls of his fighter craft as he flew alongside the massive human fleet. The stars stretched endlessly in all directions, but ahead of them loomed something different. The crimson nebula glowed, like a red storm cloud made of gas and dust, spinning slowly in the darkness of space. Jake had been flying for 12 years, but he had never seen anything like this nebula. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Red and orange lights danced inside the gas clouds, creating patterns that seemed almost alive. The nebula was huge, bigger than entire solar systems, and they had to pass through it to reach their destination. Behind Jake, 300 ships moved in perfect formation. These were not warships, but colony vessels filled with families, scientists, engineers, and dreamers. They carried everything needed to build humanity's first settlement beyond the outer rim. Children played in the corridors of the transport ships while their parents looked out at the stars, hoping for a new life on a distant world. Fleet Admiral Lisa Grant stood on the bridge of the flagship UES Liberty, watching the nebula grow larger on her screens. She was a tall woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had commanded fleets in 3 wars, but this mission was different. This time, she was not leading soldiers into battle, but protecting families on their way to a new home. The bridge crew worked quietly around her. Chief Navigator Ben Carter sat at his station, studying the readings from the nebula. His instruments showed strange patterns in the electromagnetic fields ahead. The nebula was not just a cloud of gas and dust. Something was moving inside it, creating energy storms that could tear apart any ship. Ben had been navigating starships for 20 years, but he had never seen readings like these. The nebula's interior was filled with quantum storms that made normal navigation impossible. His computers could not map a safe route through the swirling chaos ahead. Captain Alex Murphy commanded the destroyer-used Defender, one of the 12 warships protecting the convoy. He was a young officer with brown hair and quick reflexes. His ship flew at the edge of the formation, watching for any sign of trouble. The Defender was fast and heavily armed, but Murphy knew that speed and weapons would not help them against the nebula's storms. Murphy's sensors picked up something strange. Faint energy signatures appeared at the edge of his detection range, then disappeared. He frowned and ordered his crew to run a full scan. The readings were too weak to identify, but something was out there. Watching them. Dr. Susan Walsh worked in the science lab aboard the Liberty, studying data from the nebula. She was a brilliant scientist who had spent her life studying cosmic phenomena. The readings from the Crimson Nebula excited and worried her at the same time. The energy patterns inside the nebula were unlike anything in the scientific literature. Susan discovered that the nebula contained quantum storm patterns that could disrupt any ship's systems. The storms created waves of electromagnetic energy that moved through the gas clouds like ocean waves. These waves could overload electronic systems, tear apart metal hulls, and make navigation impossible. She called Admiral Grant to the science lab and showed her the data. The quantum storms were growing stronger as they watched, fed by the nebula's own rotation. Any ship that entered the nebula would face these storms, and conventional navigation would be useless once they were deep inside. Admiral Grant studied the readings with growing concern. The convoy had to pass through the nebula to reach their destination. Going around would take months, and they did not have enough supplies for such a long journey. But entering the nebula meant facing storms that could destroy the entire fleet. As they spoke, the convoy reached the nebula's outer edge. The first wisps of red gas began to swirl around the ship's hulls. The electromagnetic interference started immediately. Communications became fuzzy, and navigation systems began to flicker. Jake felt his fighter shake as the first energy waves hit. His instruments showed warning lights across the control panel. The nebula was already affecting his ship's systems, and they had barely entered the outer edge. He radioed back to the fleet, reporting the interference, far behind the human convoy. Alien ships moved through the darkness. The Corvani had been following the human fleet for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Their ships were sleek and advanced, powered by technology that humanity could barely understand. The Corvani were an old race, masters of space travel and warfare, the Corvani commander. Zektar watched the human fleet through his ship's sensors. He was puzzled by these strange beings who dared to travel so far from their homeworld. Humans were young and primitive compared to his people, but they had something that made them dangerous. They were unpredictable. Zektar had studied human behavior for months. Other races in the galaxy followed logical patterns, but humans did not. They took risks that seemed impossible, survived situations that should have killed them, and found solutions where none should exist. This made them both fascinating and terrifying. The Corvani fleet consisted of 50 advanced warships, each one more powerful than the humans' best destroyer. They could have attacked the convoy in open space and destroyed it easily. But Zektar wanted to study the humans first, to understand how they thought and fought. The Nebula provided the perfect opportunity. Zektar knew that the quantum storms would trap the human fleet inside the nebula's chaotic interior. The humans would be helpless, their primitive technology useless against the cosmic forces at work. Then the Corvani could attack at their leisure, back. On the Liberty, Admiral Grant made the decision that would change everything. The convoy could not turn back, and they could not go around the nebula. They had to go through, regardless of the danger. She ordered the fleet to enter the nebula's outer layers and proceed toward the interior. The convoy moved forward into the swirling red gas. The electromagnetic interference grew stronger with each passing minute. Ship-to-ship communications became difficult, and the navigation systems began to fail. The quantum storms were still far ahead, but their effects were already being felt. Jake's fighter bucked and rolled as energy waves washed over it. His newer systems were failing one by one, but the older, simpler instruments seemed to work better. He made a mental note of this strange fact. Perhaps the nebula's interference affected complex systems more than basic ones. Captain Murphy's destroyer shuddered as it pushed deeper into the nebula. His crew reported system failures throughout the ship. The quantum storms were still hours away, but the nebula's outer layers were already proving dangerous. Murphy wondered how they would survive the journey to the interior. Dr. Walsh continued her analysis from the science lab. The quantum storms were not random, she realized. They followed patterns like weather systems on a planet. If she could understand these patterns, perhaps she could predict where the storms would strike next. As the convoy moved deeper into the nebula, Zektar gave the order to attack. The Corvani ships accelerated toward the human fleet, their weapons charging for the assault. The trap was set. The humans were entering the nebula's dangerous interior, and the Corvani would drive them deeper into the storm. The first Corvani energy beam struck the convoy's rear guard. Captain Murphy's destroyer took a direct hit, its shields flaring as they absorbed the impact. The surprise attack had begun, and the human fleet was caught between the advancing aliens and the deadly nebula ahead. Admiral Grant realized the terrible situation immediately. The Corvani were forcing them deeper into the nebula, where the quantum storms would tear them apart. The convoy was trapped, with enemies behind and cosmic death ahead. She had to find a way to save 300,000 lives before it was too late. The Corvani attack came like lightning from the darkness. Energy beams cut through the red gas of the nebula, striking the human ships with deadly precision. Captain Murphy's destroyer shook violently as alien weapons hammered its shields. Sparks flew from control panels as the ship's systems overloaded under the assault. Murphy grabbed his communication device and shouted orders to his crew. The destroyer's engines roared to life as it turned to face the attacking aliens. Its weapons fired back into the nebula, sending bright streaks of light toward the Corvani ships. But the alien vessels were faster and more advanced. They danced around the human weapons like shadows in the red mist. Admiral Grant watched the battle unfold from the bridge of the Liberty. Her fleet was under attack from behind while facing the deadly nebula ahead. The quantum storms were growing stronger, and she could see the energy readings spike on her screens. The convoy was trapped between two forms of death. Jake Morrison's fighter was thrown sideways by an energy wave from the nebula. His instruments flickered and died, then came back online showing warning signals everywhere. The electromagnetic interference was getting worse with each passing minute. He tried to radio back to the fleet, but his communications were filled with static dot through his cockpit window. Jake could see the Corvani ships attacking the convoy. They moved with deadly grace, their weapons carving through the human formation. The alien ships seemed unaffected by the Nebula's interference, their advanced technology protecting them from the electromagnetic storms. The civilian transport ships were helpless against the attack. They carried families and colonists, not soldiers. Their captains tried to maneuver away from the alien weapons, but the transports were too slow and clumsy. Several ships took direct hits, their hulls glowing red-hot as the energy beams struck them. Dr. Walsh ran through the corridors of the Liberty as the ship shook under enemy fire. She reached the bridge just as another wave of Corvani attacks struck the fleet. The quantum storms ahead were creating massive energy vortexes that could swallow entire ships. She had to warn Admiral Grant about the danger. The quantum storms were not just electromagnetic interference. They were tears in space itself, created by the nebula's intense gravitational fields. Any ship caught in these storms would be torn apart at the molecular level. The storms were moving toward the fleet like a wall of destruction. Chief Navigator Ben Carter fought with his instruments as they failed one by one. The nebula's interference was destroying his navigation systems faster than his crew could repair them. He had lost contact with half the convoy, and his screens showed only static where the other ships should be. The Corvani pressed their attack, driving the human fleet deeper into the nebula. Commander Zektar smiled as he watched the humans flee into the cosmic storm. His plan was working perfectly. The nebula would do what his weapons could not: destroy the entire human convoy without losing a single Corvani ship. But something unexpected happened. Jake's fighter, flying at the edge of the formation, did not succumb to the nebula's interference like the larger ships. His older, simpler systems continued to function while the advanced electronics on the big vessels failed. His basic instruments could still read the energy patterns around him. Jake realized that his fighter was different from the rest of the fleet. While the destroyers and transports used complex computer systems that the nebula's interference could disrupt, his fighter relied on simpler technology. The electromagnetic storms that crippled the big ships barely affected his basic controls. He banked his fighter toward the nebula's interior, away from the Corvani attack. The red gas grew thicker around him, and the energy storms became more violent. His fighter shook and bucked in the cosmic winds, but it kept flying. The simple controls responded to his touch even as the advanced systems failed. Behind him, the battle raged on. Captain Murphy's destroyer was taking heavy damage, its shields failing under the constant barrage. The captain ordered his crew to protect the civilian transports at all costs. The Defender moved between the aliens and the helpless colonists, absorbing the enemy fire with its armored hull. The quantum storm struck the fleet like a hurricane of energy. The first transport ship caught in the storm simply vanished, torn apart by forces beyond human understanding. The crew of the Liberty watched in horror as their sensors showed the ship's energy signature disappear from their screens. Admiral Grant realized the terrible truth. The Corvani were not trying to destroy the fleet quickly. They were herding the humans into the nebula's interior, where the quantum storms would do the killing for them. It was a trap more deadly than any weapon. The electromagnetic interference grew stronger as the fleet moved deeper into the nebula. Ship-to-ship communications failed completely. The convoy began to scatter as individual captains lost contact with the command ship. Each vessel fought alone against the cosmic forces and alien attacks. Jake found himself separated from the main fleet as the chaos continued. His fighter flew through corridors of red gas, following paths that seemed to open and close randomly. The nebula was like a living thing, its storms creating temporary passages through the dangerous interior. Dr. Walsh managed to contact Jake through his fighter's short-range radio. The transmission was weak and filled with static, but she could hear his voice. She explained what she had learned about the quantum storms and their deadly power. Someone had to find a way through the nebula's heart, she said. or the entire fleet would be destroyed. The mission became clear to Jake. His fighter was the only vessel that could survive the journey into the nebula's most dangerous regions. The simple technology that made it seem primitive compared to the fleet's advanced ships was actually its greatest strength. He could go where no other ship could follow. Captain Murphy's destroyer was losing the battle against the Corvani. His weapons were running out of energy and his shields were failing. The alien ships pressed their attack, knowing that the human vessel could not hold out much longer. Murphy ordered his crew to prepare for a final stand. The quantum storms continued to claim ships from the human fleet. Each vessel that entered the storm zones was torn apart by the incredible forces at work. The nebula seemed to be feeding on the destruction, growing stronger with each ship it consumed. Jake pushed his fighter deeper into the nebula, following his instincts rather than his failing instruments. The red gas swirled around him like a living ocean, and the energy storms created beautiful but deadly light shows in the darkness. He was flying blind into the heart of cosmic chaos. Admiral Grant watched her fleet disappear into the nebula's interior. The quantum storms were scattering the ships across multiple storm cells, making coordination impossible. Each captain was fighting for survival alone, cut off from the rest of the convoy. The Corvani ships followed the humans into the nebula's outer layers, but they could not penetrate as deep as the human vessels. Their advanced technology, which gave them such an advantage in normal space, became a liability in the electromagnetic chaos of the nebula. The quantum storms disrupted their sophisticated systems. Just as they did the human ships, Jake's fighter dove through a particularly violent energy storm, its hull glowing from the electromagnetic discharge. The simple controls still responded to his touch, and the basic instruments continued to function. He was learning to read the nebula's patterns, understanding how the storms moved and changed. The fleet was lost in the cosmic maelstrom, scattered across the nebula's dangerous interior. The quantum storms raged around them, tearing apart any ship that entered their path. The Corvani attack had driven them into this trap, and now they faced destruction from forces beyond imagination. Jake realized that he was humanity's only hope. His fighter could survive where the larger ships could not. If he could find a path through the nebula's heart, he might be able to guide the fleet to safety. But first, he had to survive the journey into the storm's most deadly regions. Jake Morrison flew his fighter deeper into the heart of the Crimson Nebula, leaving the scattered fleet behind. The red gas grew thicker around him, and the quantum storms became more violent with each passing minute. His instruments flickered and died one by one, forcing him to rely on manual controls and his own instincts. The nebula's interior was like nothing Jake had ever seen. Massive energy vortexes spun through the gas clouds, creating whirlpools of pure electromagnetic force. Lightning bolts as big as starships crackled between the storm cells, and the very fabric of space seemed to bend and twist around him. His fighter shook violently as waves of energy washed over it. The hull began to glow from the electromagnetic discharge, and Jake could smell the sharp scent of overheated electronics. But his simple controls still responded to his touch, and the basic flight systems continued to work even as the advanced computers failed. Behind him, the remnants of the human fleet fought desperately for survival. Captain Murphy's destroyer was engaged in a running battle with the Corvani ships, using the nebula's interference to hide from the alien sensors. The electromagnetic storms that crippled his systems also blinded the enemy weapons, giving him a small advantage. Murphy ordered his crew to fire into the red gas clouds, hoping to hit the invisible alien ships. The destroyer's weapons lit up the nebula with bright flashes, but the Corvani vessels were too fast and too well hidden. They struck back with precise energy beams that found their target despite the interference. Admiral Grant tried to maintain control of her scattered fleet from the Bridge of the Liberty. Her communications were dead, and her sensors showed only static. She had no way to know how many ships were still alive or where they were located. The quantum storms had turned her organized convoy into a collection of lost vessels fighting alone in the cosmic chaos. Dr. Walsh worked frantically in the science lab, trying to understand the patterns in the nebula's energy storms. Her instruments were failing, but she could still gather basic data about the quantum fields around them. She began to see something strange in the readings, a rhythm that seemed to pulse through the entire nebula. The quantum storms were not random, she realized. They moved in patterns like the heartbeat of some massive cosmic creature. The energy waves rose and fell in regular cycles, creating brief moments of calm between the violent eruptions. If someone could time their movements to match these patterns, they might be able to navigate through the storms. Jake felt the rhythm too, though he could not understand the science behind it. His fighter rode the energy waves like a small boat on a stormy ocean. When he fought against the waves, his ship was battered and thrown around. But when he moved with the rhythm, the cosmic forces seemed to carry him forward. He began to understand that the nebula was not just a chaotic storm, but a living system with its own natural patterns. The quantum storms were like breathing, expanding and contracting in regular cycles. The electromagnetic lightning was like a nervous system, carrying information through the gas clouds. Jake pushed his fighter toward the nebula's core, following the energy patterns deeper into the storm. The red gas became so thick that he could barely see beyond his cockpit. The quantum storms raged around him with incredible power, but he was learning to read their movements and avoid their deadly paths. His radio crackled with static, and he heard Dr. Walsh's voice through the interference. She was trying to contact him from the Liberty, her transmission weak but clear enough to understand. She had discovered the same patterns he was feeling, and she wanted to help him navigate through the storm. The nebula's core was a sight that would remain burned in Jake's memory forever. At the center of the cosmic storm was a massive energy vortex that stretched across space like a hurricane made of pure electromagnetic force. The vortex spun slowly, creating the rhythm that pulsed through the entire nebula. Jake realized that this vortex was the key to everything. It was the heart of the nebula, the source of all the energy storms and quantum fields. The vortex created currents of electromagnetic force that flowed through the gas clouds like rivers of energy. If he could map these currents, he might be able to find a safe path through the storm. He began to fly around the vortex, studying its patterns and movements. The energy currents flowed in specific directions, creating channels through the chaos. Some channels led to dead ends where the quantum storms were strongest. Others curved back toward the nebula's edge, offering potential escape routes. The work was dangerous and exhausting. Jake had to fly by instinct, reading the energy patterns through the way they affected his fighter. His instruments were useless in the electromagnetic chaos, and his life support systems were beginning to fail. But he continued his mapping, knowing that the entire fleet depended on his success. Meanwhile, the scattered human ships fought their own battles against the nebula's fury. Several transport vessels were caught in quantum storms and torn apart by the incredible forces. Their crews had no time to send distress signals before the cosmic hurricane consumed them. Captain Murphy's destroyer was losing its fight against the Corvani ships. The alien vessels had adapted to the nebula's interference better than expected, and they pressed their attack with renewed fury. The defenders' shields were failing, and several sections of the ship were venting atmosphere into space. Murphy made a desperate decision. He ordered his crew to ram the nearest Corvani vessel, hoping to take at least one enemy ship with them. The destroyer accelerated toward the alien craft, its engines screaming as they pushed beyond their design limits. The collision was spectacular. The human destroyer struck the Corvani ship at full speed, and both vessels exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The explosion created a shock wave that rippled through the nebula, temporarily disrupting the quantum storms in the immediate area. Admiral Grant felt the shock wave reach the Liberty, and knew that Murphy had made his final sacrifice. She ordered a moment of silence for the brave captain and his crew, then turned her attention back to the desperate fight for survival. Jake felt the explosion as a pulse in the nebula's energy patterns. The shockwave created a temporary disruption in the quantum fields, revealing new information about the storm's structure. He used this opportunity to map more of the energy currents, building a clearer picture of the safe channels through the chaos. Dr. Walsh detected the same disruption from her instruments on the Liberty. She realized that Jake was using the explosion's effects to study the nebula's patterns. She began transmitting everything she had learned about the quantum storms, hoping to help him complete his mapping of the safe passage. The nebula's core revealed its secrets slowly. Jake discovered that the energy currents formed a complex network of channels that connected different parts of the storm. Some channels were stable and could be navigated safely. Others were unstable and would collapse without warning, trapping any ship that entered them. He found what he was looking for near the vortex's edge. A stable energy current flowed from the nebula's heart toward its outer boundary, creating a corridor of relatively calm space through the chaos. The corridor was narrow and required precise navigation, but it offered a path to safety. Jake began to trace the corridor's route, following the energy current as it wound through the quantum storms. The path was complex, requiring perfect timing to avoid the most dangerous areas. But it was possible, and it led to a region where the nebula's interference was weaker. He activated his emergency beacon and began transmitting navigation data to the scattered fleet. The signal was weak and filled with static, but it contained the coordinates of the safe passage he had discovered. The transmission repeated continuously, broadcasting the route that could save 300,000 lives. The message spread through the nebula as surviving ships picked up the signal and relayed it to others. Admiral Grant received the transmission on the Liberty and immediately understood its importance. Jake had found a way through the storm, but now the scattered fleet had to reach his position and follow the narrow path to safety. Jake Morrison's emergency beacon cut through the electromagnetic chaos of the nebula like a lighthouse in a storm. The signal was weak and filled with static, but it carried the most important message in human history. The coordinates of the safe passage repeated over and over, broadcasting hope to the scattered fleet. Admiral Grant received the transmission on the Liberty and immediately understood what Jake had accomplished. Her communications officer worked frantically to clean up the signal and relay it to the surviving ships. The navigation data was complex, showing a narrow path through the quantum storms that required perfect timing to navigate. Dr. Walsh studied the transmission data with growing excitement. Jake had not just found a safe passage through the nebula, he had discovered the secret of the cosmic storm itself. The route followed the natural energy currents that flowed through the gas clouds, using the nebula's own rhythm to guide ships to safety. The first ships to receive Jake's signal were the closest to his position. These vessels had been hiding in the smaller storm cells, trying to avoid the worst of the quantum turbulence. Their captains looked at the navigation data with disbelief, then slowly began to follow the coordinates toward Jake's beacon. Jake maintained his position near the nebula's core, his fighter serving as a guide for the approaching ships. His hull was glowing from the electromagnetic discharge and his life support systems were failing. But he continued to broadcast the navigation data, knowing that hundreds of thousands of lives depended on his signal. The Corvani had not given up their attack. Commander Zektar led his remaining ships deeper into the nebula, following the human vessels toward Jake's position. But the alien ships were struggling against the quantum storms, their advanced technology no match for the cosmic forces at work. The first human ship to reach Jake's position was a small transport vessel carrying 5,000 colonists. The captain followed the navigation data carefully, timing his movements to match the nebula's rhythm. His ship shook as energy waves washed over it, but the route held true. He passed through the corridor safely and emerged into the calmer space. Beyond, Admiral Grant watched the successful passage with relief and ordered the Liberty to begin moving toward Jake's position. The flagship was massive and slow, making it difficult to navigate through the narrow corridor. But the crew worked together, following Jake's guidance with perfect precision. More ships began to arrive at Jake's location, creating a growing convoy that stretched through the nebula's interior. Each vessel followed the one ahead, moving through the energy corridor like beads on a string. The passage was narrow and required careful navigation, but it offered their only hope of escape. Jake felt his fighter beginning to break apart under the stress of the electromagnetic storms. His engines were overheating and his hull was developing cracks from the constant energy bombardment. But he held his position, continuing to broadcast the navigation data even as his ship slowly failed around him. Dr. Walsh coordinated the timing. From her position on the Liberty, she had studied the nebula's patterns and could predict when the energy currents would be strongest. Her calculations helped the convoy time their movements to avoid the most dangerous moments in the storm cycle. The Corvani ships finally reached the human convoy, but they found themselves at a severe disadvantage. The quantum storms that the humans had learned to navigate were tearing apart the alien vessels. Their sophisticated technology could not adapt to the chaotic environment, and several ships were destroyed by the electromagnetic turbulence. Commander Zektar watched in amazement. As the human ships moved through the deadly corridor with increasing skill, the primitive beings had done something his advanced civilization thought impossible. They had tamed the cosmic storm and turned it into a pathway to safety. Jake's beacon began to flicker as his power systems failed. He switched to backup power, knowing that he had only minutes before his transmission would stop completely. The convoy was still moving through the corridor, and many ships had yet to reach safety. A group of Corvani fighters broke through the storm and attacked the human convoy directly. Their weapons fired into the narrow corridor, trying to disrupt the carefully timed passage. Several transport ships were hit by the alien energy beams, their hulls glowing as the weapons struck home. The human warships that had survived the earlier battles moved to protect the convoy. These vessels were damaged and low on ammunition, but they fought with desperate courage. They positioned themselves between the aliens and the civilian transports, absorbing the enemy fire with their armored hulls. Jake realized that the Corvani attack was disrupting the convoy's timing. Ships were falling behind schedule, and the careful rhythm that allowed safe passage was being broken. He had to do something to stop the alien assault before it destroyed the entire rescue operation. His fighter was nearly dead, but Jake still had control of its weapons. He turned toward the attacking Corvani ships and opened fire, his energy beams cutting through the red gas of the Nebula. The alien fighters were forced to break off their attack on the convoy to deal with this new threat. The Corvani pilots were skilled and experienced, but they were fighting in an environment that favored the humans. Jake used the Nebula's chaos to his advantage, leading the alien fighters into the most dangerous parts of the storm. His simple systems could function in the electromagnetic turbulence. While the advanced alien technology failed, one by one, the Corvani fighters were destroyed by the quantum storms. Their sophisticated ships could not handle the cosmic forces that Jake's primitive fighter had learned to navigate. The alien pilots died in brilliant flashes of light. As their vessels were torn apart by the nebula's fury, Admiral Grant's convoy continued to move through the energy corridor, following Jake's guidance toward safety. The passage was long and dangerous, requiring constant attention to the timing and navigation. But the human ships worked together, helping each other through the most difficult sections. Jake's fighter finally began to break apart completely. His engines died and his hull started to crack open from the electromagnetic stress. But he continued to broadcast the navigation data, using his ship's emergency power to maintain the signal that guided the convoy. Dr. Walsh detected the failure of Jake's systems and realized that they were about to lose their guide. She quickly transmitted all the navigation data to the other ships, ensuring that they could complete the passage even without Jake's beacon. The convoy would have to navigate the final sections of the corridor on their own. The last group of ships in the convoy included some of the largest transport vessels, carrying tens of thousands of colonists. These ships were slow and difficult to maneuver, making them vulnerable to the quantum storms. Their captains followed the navigation data carefully, knowing that any mistake could be fatal. Jake watched the final ships pass through the corridor. As his fighter died around him, his cockpit was filled with smoke and his life support systems had failed completely. But he had accomplished his mission. The convoy was safe and 300,000 humans would live to see their new home. The nebulous storms began to calm as the convoy moved away from the core. The quantum turbulence lessened and the electromagnetic interference faded. The ships that had survived the passage found themselves in the clearer space beyond the nebula, where normal navigation was possible once again. Commander Zektar watched the human convoy escape with a mixture of admiration and defeat. His advanced civilization had been outmaneuvered by a primitive species that refused to accept the impossible. The humans had turned the nebula's own power against his forces, using their adaptability and courage to achieve victory. Jake's transmission finally ended as his fighter's power systems failed completely. His ship drifted helplessly in the cosmic storm, its hull glowing from the electromagnetic discharge. But his sacrifice had saved the fleet, and his navigation data would guide the survivors to safety. Jake Morrison's fighter drifted silently through the heart of the Crimson Nebula, its hull cracked and broken from the electromagnetic storms. The small ship had given everything to save the fleet, and now it floated powerless in the cosmic chaos. Jake sat in his dark cockpit, his life support gone, breathing the last of his air. As he watched the final transport ships disappear into the safe corridor, the convoy moved through the energy passage like a long chain of lights in the darkness. Each ship followed the path that Jake had discovered, timing their movements to match the nebula's rhythm. The quantum storm still raged around them, but the vessels stayed within the narrow corridor where the cosmic forces were calmer. Admiral Grant stood on the bridge of the Liberty, watching her fleet escape from the nebula's deadly embrace. Her communications officer had managed to restore contact with most of the surviving ships. The count was heartbreaking but hopeful. They had lost 47 vessels to the quantum storms and Corvani attacks, but 253 ships had made it through the passage. Dr. Walsh worked frantically to maintain the navigation data that guided the convoy. Without Jake's beacon, the ships had to rely on the timing calculations she had developed. The corridor through the nebula was like a river with a current, and the ships had to flow with it to avoid being destroyed by the cosmic rapids. The final stretch of the passage was the most dangerous. The energy corridor curved through a region where multiple quantum storms intersected, creating a maze of electromagnetic turbulence. The ships had to navigate through this area with perfect precision, following the exact route that Jake had mapped. Commander Zektar watched the human convoy escape with growing amazement. His remaining Corvani ships were trapped in the nebula's outer layers, unable to follow the humans through the energy corridor. The quantum storms were too powerful for his advanced vessels to handle, and several more alien ships had been destroyed by the cosmic forces. The Corvani commander realized that he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. These primitive humans had accomplished what his technologically superior civilization thought impossible. They had navigated through a cosmic storm that should have destroyed any fleet, and they had done it through courage, adaptability, and sacrifice. Jake felt his consciousness fading as the oxygen in his cockpit ran out. His fighter was slowly being torn apart by the electromagnetic forces, but he was at peace. He had completed his mission and saved the convoy. 300,000 humans would live to build their new colony because of what he had done. In his final moments, Jake thought about the families on the transport ships, the children who would grow up on a distant world, and the future that humanity would build among the stars. His sacrifice had made all of that possible. He closed his eyes and let the cosmic storm take him. The Liberty emerged from the nebula's far side. Into the clear space beyond, the electromagnetic interference faded, and the ship's systems came back online. Admiral Grant felt the weight of command lift slightly from her shoulders as she realized they had truly escaped the deadly trap. One by one, the surviving ships reported their status as they cleared the nebula. The transport vessels carried the majority of the colonists, and most had suffered only minor damage. The warships had taken the worst beating, but enough had survived to protect the convoy on the rest of their journey. Dr. Walsh stood at the observation deck, looking back at the Crimson Nebula as it spun slowly in space. The red gas clouds continued their eternal dance, hiding the cosmic storms within. Somewhere in that chaos lay the wreckage of Jake's fighter, a small monument to the courage that had saved them all. The convoy regrouped in the calm space beyond the nebula. Admiral Grant ordered search teams to scan for any survivors who might still be trapped in the storm. but the electromagnetic interference made it impossible to detect individual ships. They had to accept that those who had not made it through the passage were lost forever. News of Jake's heroic flight spread through the surviving fleet. The colonists learned how a single pilot had navigated the nebula's heart and discovered the path to safety. Children asked their parents to tell them the story of the brave fighter pilot who had saved them all. The Corvani fleet remained trapped in the nebula's outer layers for several more hours before they finally gave up and withdrew. Commander Zektar sent a message to his home world, reporting the failure of the mission and the unexpected capabilities of the human species. His superiors would need to reconsider their plans for dealing with these strange beings. Admiral Grant held a memorial service for all the ships and crews lost in the nebula. Captain Murphy and his destroyer crew were honored for their sacrifice, along with the transport captains who had died in the quantum storms. But the longest part of the ceremony was dedicated to Jake Morrison, the pilot whose courage had made their escape possible. The Admiral spoke about Jake's final flight through the cosmic storm, his discovery of the nebula's secrets, and his sacrifice to guide the fleet to safety. She declared that his name would be remembered as long as humans traveled among the stars. The colony they were going to build would be named Morrison Colony in his honor. Dr. Walsh presented her scientific analysis of the nebula passage to the fleet's officers. Jake had not just saved them through courage and skill, but through an intuitive understanding of cosmic forces that even their advanced instruments could not fully measure. He had proven that human adaptability could triumph over any challenge. The convoy resumed its journey toward their destination, but they were forever changed by their passage through the Crimson Nebula. The survivors carried with them a new understanding of what humans could accomplish when faced with impossible odds. They had learned that sometimes the simplest solutions required the greatest courage. The story of Jake Morrison's flight through the nebula spread beyond the human fleet. Other species in the galaxy heard about the pilot who had navigated a cosmic storm to save his people. The tale became legendary, proof that humanity possessed something that advanced technology could not replace. Years later, when the colony was established and thriving, the colonists built a monument to Jake and all those who had died in the nebula. The monument stood in the center of Morrison City, reminding future generations of the sacrifice that had made their new world possible. The Corvani never again underestimated human capabilities. They withdrew their forces from human space and began to study this species that could achieve the impossible. Other alien races took notice as well, recognizing that humanity represented something new and unpredictable in the cosmic order. Jake Morrison's fighter was never found, lost forever in the heart of the Crimson Nebula. But his legacy lived on. In the colony that bore his name and in the countless stories told by those who had survived the passage, he had become a symbol of human courage and determination, proving that one person could make a difference in the fate of hundreds of thousands. The nebula continued to spin in space, its red gas clouds hiding the quantum storms within. But it no longer seemed like an obstacle to human expansion. Jake had shown that even the most dangerous cosmic phenomena could be navigated through courage, intelligence, and sacrifice. Admiral Grant often looked back at the nebula from her new command post on Morrison Colony. She remembered the young pilot who had saved them all and wondered what other challenges humanity would face among the stars. Whatever those challenges might be, she knew that humans would find a way to overcome them, just as Jake had found a way through the cosmic storm. The galaxy had learned that humans were not just another species struggling to survive among the stars. They were something special, capable of achieving the impossible through their unique combination of courage, adaptability, and determination. Jake Morrison's flight through the Crimson Nebula had proven that to the entire universe,